the next item is actionable. And this is our LEA specific license policy and request for LEA specific licenses. Superintendent Coleman, you're taking this one?
Yes, I will. Just as a reminder, all of our previous annual reports are located on our website too, for anyone who wants to do any comparisons. Yes, so this is a very important item for us. As you know, your own board rule requires the local school board to adopt a policy to allow the use of LEA specific licenses. And letters of authorization previously, and now under the new licensing rules, now all of that has been rolled into LEA specific licenses. And so we have several that need to be approved every year. It's always been a critical use for us in finding the best qualified people for our students. So the first thing we need to do is the board needs to consider the approval of the license policy. And once there's a vote to approve that, then we would like to talk to you about the 16 individual LEA licenses, LEA specific licenses rather, that we need the board to approve this year to allow our folks to continue working with the kids.
So the LEA specific license policy is in our backups for USDB. I think at this time it would be appropriate to maybe start with a motion. Any board members want to make a motion? I'm looking for the hands. Of the motion would read that the board approved the LEA specific license policy for USDB. Board member Belknap.
So moved, Chair.
Okay, so we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
And that was
Well,
board member Newell. Okay, the motion before the board is that the board approved the LEA specific license policy for USDB. Discussion to the motion.
I'll give you a little background. You can see that the policy itself is rather short and simple, and it really just mirrors what's required in board rule. It's funny having the board approve a policy that complies with its own rule, but that's because you're all boards. There's not much to it.
That is correct. I'm not seeing any discussion to the motion. So the motion before the board that the board.
Chair, I see board member Nielsen's hand up. I don't know if he's trying to speak to this.
I see board member Scott Nielsen's hand is that the one that you see up? That's still up?
Yeah, I don't know if it's still up from the past or if he's trying to comment on this.
Okay, board member Scott Nielsen, did you still have your hand raised? I didn't think you could get it down. Board member Scott Nielsen, do you have a question or comment?
No, is my hand still raised?
Yeah, it's still there. Seeing that you don't have a question or comment, okay.
Sorry, I'll go ahead and fix that right now. I apologize.
Okay, we're going to vote on this. The motion before the board is that the board approve the LEA specific license policy for USDB. So please vote. So it appears all the voting is complete with the exception of board member Nielsen. Can you see where to vote? Are you on a computer? Are you remote or?
Yeah, no, I'm on I'm on my phone.
It'll be down in the.
I vote aye.
It'd be right where you raise your hand.
Right, I voted aye. It says it's green, so.
Okay.
I don't know why it wouldn't do that, but.
Okay. Voting is complete, and it appears the voting is unanimous. Is that how you see it, Vice Chair Cummins?
Yes.
Okay, we'll have to work on that glitch here on Board Member Nielsen.
Chair Huntsman,
Yes,
Board Member Nielsen, you were on twice. So you voted on your iPhone, but your computer is still on as well.
Oh, my bad. Okay.
all right. Well, we're just moving forward, so we got that figured out. Okay, Superintendent Coleman, do you want to speak to the second proposed motion?
Yes. So did that motion pass? I'm assuming.
Yes, motion passed
Okay.
unanimously.
Thank you. So the next item that is going to the only other item about licensing that needs to get board approval today is under the document called LEA Specific Data 2021. And in your packets, you'll notice that is a list of 16 educators and a description of exactly the kind of situation and the rationale where they need to have an LEA specific license approved for this year. There are a few of these that are just starting out at the beginning of the process. However, most of them are highly effective, already been employed for us, are doing a fantastic job, and they have great qualifications, but it just doesn't match up with our licensing rules at this point yet. And some of that is a function of, for example, we have a school counselor who is a DOPL licensed therapist who is deaf. She's actually presented to you as a board previously. She's amazing, doing phenomenal things with the students. There is one class that she did not have in school that would be required to get a board license to be a school counselor. But she's working and being highly effective in that role already. And so we just need an LEA license approved right now until something happens with that other class and she gets that. There are others, for example, who we have one teacher on this list, and I'm not going to go through all of them. Let me tell you what we're going to do with this. There are some problems with the licensing rules currently as they apply to USDB that preclude some very well qualified teachers of the deaf mostly. I think there's only one person on here for the School of the Blind, but would preclude them from ever getting a or more permanent license with the board. So we're going to come back in a future meeting and talk to you about specific requests to allow licensing to happen for the people that need to be teaching our kids. But I'm just going to give you a couple examples sort of as a preview right now of the types of things that are requiring these LEA specific licenses at this time, so at least they're legit for this year. Another one, for example, has been teaching here for years, got a master's degree here, had to go, Michelle, I might be saying this wrong, but this is the general idea. Did not get a master's degree here. We don't have a college that offers this kind of program in Utah, but our licensing rules require that. So she went out of state, which many of these are, doing online programs. They fly there during the summers, finish their degree, and then come back here. But then our licensing says, well, then you have to be licensed in that state. And so they go back to, this is Texas, for example, and Texas says, oh, we're not going to give you a license, even though you completed the program here, because you didn't do your student teaching in Texas. You did your student teaching in Utah. And the teacher's saying, I've always lived in Utah. I've never lived in Texas. And then there's another one in Florida who's trying to get a Florida license approved here. And part of the problem is we don't have any colleges in Utah yet, although one is going to make application to satisfy or to qualify as a higher ed institution. And so our people are doing everything they can, but they're being caught in between the basically the requirements of our licensing and other states' licensing when the bottom line is they are great teachers, they know what they're doing, and the children are benefiting from them in a great way. So you can look through all the details of that. That's what they are. But whether they're just starting out or they're having these licensing challenges, these are the 16 this year that we need to be approved for an LEA-specific license, and that will buy us more time to get their individual situations worked out and to work with the board on making accommodations so we can have these good people get more permanent licenses as they go forward and continue with their careers.
And thank you for that explanation, and also for how you put this chart together, especially that last column that kind of justifies why you're asking. Board members, at this time, do you have any other questions, or is there a motion? A motion that might come from the board would be that the board approve LEA-specific licenses for USDB as requested. Board Member Cannon?
I'd like to make that motion exactly as you stated it, Chair.
Okay. And that would be that the board approve LEA-specific licenses for USDB as requested. Is there a second? Board Member Marsh,
I'll
your
second
hand's up.
that, Chair. I'll second that, Chair.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. Discussion to the motion. Board Member Marsh, let's see. I'm not seeing any hands raised. Oh, Vice Chair Brittany Cummins.
Yeah, sorry, just a really quick question before I vote. On the list that was posted up here just a second ago, it had the license area and the endorsement area. Just for my understanding, was that the license area that's required for the position that you hired the person for, and then the rationale is the explanation of how they're working to qualify for that?
That's correct.
Okay,
And-
thank you.
Now, some of these are special education license areas, but when they get their permanent licenses, it may be a deaf education license instead. Is that right, Michelle?
Right now, the deaf education license, we have to apply for it this way just because of the where their programming is at this point. Once they get approved, we can switch them over, and the license area is intended to be a deaf and hard of hearing license with an emphasis in whatever ASL English, listening and spoken language. Right now, some of them haven't, some of the programs haven't made an application to be considered that way.
The higher ed programs, right. So
Correct,
all that work
the higher
we did
ed
on
programs.
the deaf ed license 2 years ago still can't quite be implemented because the higher ed programs haven't applied to provide that with the board yet.
They're
Okay.
working on it.
Great.
The two that we have internally in the state. The other ones out of the state will most likely, most of the out of state applicants will most likely be applying for the deaf and hard of hearing license with an endorsement in one of the three areas. It seems to be the preferred way that our teachers would rather be identified as a deaf educator with a specialty rather than a special educator with a deaf and hard of hearing specialty.
Okay.
Vice Chair Cummins, does this answer your question, or do you have a follow-up?
That was sufficient. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I'm not seeing any other hands raised, and so the motion before the board is that the board approve LEA-specific licenses for USDB as requested. Okay, board members, at this time, please vote. Voting is complete, and the motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Superintendent Cohen, please
Thank
continue.
you.
The next one's 3.4 on the Advisory Council sunset. So,
Yes, only two more items here. The Advisory Council sunset. As you may be aware, last year in the legislative session, a large list of commissions and advisory councils was approved by the legislature to sunset over the next 1, 2, or 3 years. The USDB Advisory Council was one of those items, and it is scheduled to sunset next year in 2021, June of 2021. So we had this discussion with the Advisory Council and asked them to provide feedback, knowing that we would be coming, this would be an agenda item for the board today in our meeting. We had quite a good discussion with the Advisory Council, and the recommendation from the council and also from us as the administration of USDB is that if the board is willing to put the language, essentially the same language from the state code, and just take it and adopt it into the USDB board rule, they would be comfortable not having the legal requirement per se of the state code to have an advisory council. But if the board was willing to do that, they would like to just continue the way it is. As an administration, we support that, especially over the last couple of years. The advisory council has been a tremendous support, and they have given us very, very good insight and feedback to things, as well as I think they've provided good feedback to the board to reinforce or clarify things that you hear directly from us as your administrators. And so that was, for what it's worth, that's the feedback from the advisory council. They did not think it would be a good idea to just dissolve it and not require it anymore. They also like the way that it's organized currently. And board member Cannon will remember this because she was a board member at the time, but previously, a long time ago, we had what was called the Institutional Council. It was much more political, and it created more problems than solutions at the time. And this was actually before my time as well. I've just heard the stories from members of the board that I served with when I was on the board. And so anyway, but when the board or the legislature or both restructured it, they made it much more functional and helpful. And so it's our recommendation that, for what it's worth, this is not an action item at this time, but it's more of a just feedback from us in the advisory council saying, if you're willing to put it into board rule, then they wouldn't feel that it was necessary to request that the legislature keep it in the state law.
So Superintendent Coleman, it is kind of an actionable item if we give direction to have the policy, that one sunset, and then we come back with a policy. And just FYI, at 11:15 times certain, we're doing the Teacher of the Year, and a lot of teachers are going to be logging on. So we've got about 15 minutes to get before we get to that space on a time certain. So I don't want to rush. This is really important, and I appreciate the feedback. Deputy Superintendent Stallings, do you have anything to add to this briefly? I thought Superintendent did a good job.
No, I thought Superintendent Coleman did a great job. And I just mentioned in the comments that, yes, we would like an official recommendation either way from the board so we could report that to the Education Interim Committee when it's discussed.
Okay. Hand is raised. Board Member Scott Hansen.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to speak in support of this. I think that advisory council has been very valuable, as Lieutenant Coleman said, both to the administration at USDB and also to us. I'd hate to see that resource go away. I will make a motion that we approve the sunset, but that we also adopt some board rule that would allow the advisory board to continue instruction.
Board Member Hansen, can I read something that you might better state your position, and then you can see if you want to put this in a motion? And that is that the board recommends the Utah State Legislature sunset subsection 53E-8-2044, and that staff prepare a draft board policy codifying the USDB Advisory Council for discussion in an upcoming meeting. Would that meet your,
Certainly accept that revised version of my motion, and I would make the motion as stated.
okay, do we have a second? Thank you, Board Member Hanson.
I'll second that, Chair. Mark Marsh.
Okay, thank you. Discussion to the motion, Board Member Earl.
Yes, I do have maybe a clarifying question on this. Because the first part of this, if we don't continue this, if we allow this to sunset, the very first part under it, if I'm reading right, 53E 8204, the state board is the governing board of the Utah School of the Deaf and the Blind. The state board shall appoint a superintendent for the Utah Schools for the Deaf and the Blind. Anyways, it seems like there's more in here than just that advisory board, that there's more to it. Is it just the advisory part that's being sunsetted, or the whole?
Yes, it's the, oh, sorry, Angie or Deputy Superintendent Stallings, would you answer Board Member Earl's question, please?
Yes, I'd be happy to. That is a great question, Board Member Earl. It's only subsection 4 of that section that would be repealed. So the rest of the section would remain.
Okay, thank you for that clarifying. And you may have stated that somehow I missed it as I was looking through the law, so I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Okay, so the motion that's before the board is that the board recommends the Utah State Legislature sunset subsection 53E-8-204, subsection 4, and that staff prepares a draft board policy codifying the USDB Advisory Council for discussion in an upcoming meeting. I'm not seeing any other hand raised, so please vote. The voting is complete and the motion passes unanimously.